Thank you for joining. Welcome, everybody. Um, Welcome to the third in the series of webinars that I'm delivering as part of the Supplier Ready program for Brent on writing public sector bids and tenders. This third one is complementary to the other two and goes into a bit more detail. We'll cover acronyms and different areas of detail. Not so you're going to become an expert in an hour, but it does mean that by the end of this, there are things you may well see in documentation or things that are discussed. You'll realize that you've actually heard before and you'll understand what they are. Just very quickly about me. I've been involved in tendering and bid writing for over 10 years, both working for a large corporate capita and running my own small advisory company. And we work with Brandu in the north of England. So the agenda. As I said, there we're going to go through some terminology. We're going to show you some details about tender documents. We're going to show you a live example. And by that, I mean a genuine example of what's called an invitation to tender. That's your first acronym. We're talking about evaluation methodology and what's known as MEET. We'll get to what MEET is. We'll talk about tender timelines. And then there's some other bits, jobs to be done, ESG, delivering social value, and consortium and partnerships for small and new companies. And then at the end, I will endeavour to leave time for a Q&A at the end. I will be looking at the chat as we go along. So if there's something you want to ask a question or something, then I will try and get that answered for you. Or you can simply wait until the end and make sure that I have the opportunity to answer for you. Okay, so let's get into it. So you'll have seen this before if you've attended the other two. This is our process for how to submit a winning bid, how to engage in procurement, as later on in the other areas of the Fit to Bid program, they'll explain how to do that. On the great arrow there, online bid capability assessment. All of you, those attending and those that are registered, will be receiving a specific link to online bid capability assessment next week. It's essential that you complete this, because once you complete this informs your two one-to-ones and helps us understand where you are, what your understanding is, the process, etc., so we can support you correctly and give you the support that you need. So you get those links next week. So there are differences between the public sector and the private sector. I'm going to assume that maybe not all, but a majority of you will be working in the private sector, so like ordinary commercial customers. And if you've not worked with the public sector, so government at all levels, from a small town council right up to government departments, they operate in a slightly different way. So let's talk about some comparisons and differentiators. Budgets and funding. So in general terms, as much as a business may well put together funding for the year and have a cash flow forecast, etc., but they will work on business requirements. They can respond to things and make money available. At local authority and government level, they can't do this. It is allocated annually and it is fixed. Apart from very specific things that come up normally from national government, they are fixed. So they know what they've got to spend and what they've got to spend it on for that year. Regulations, it says here low restrictions versus restricted by legislation. So talking about government departments, local authorities, town councils, they are very heavily regulated and legislated, and for good reason. In business, generally, restrictions are low. It depends upon the industry. Of course, my background is in the energy industry, and actually that's very, very highly regulated because that's critical national infrastructure, and so there are specific things that cover it. However, a lot of business, by comparison, is low regulated. Okay, so just very quickly. So I don't know your name, but I attend. So the question is, I attend a training where the host says, if you do not already have relationships with a local authority, then you pretty much have no chance of winning the bid. To what extent do you think this is true? I don't think that's true at all. Relationships are good, but they do not give out tenders based upon relationships. They give it based upon the quality of the tender response. So it is good to have relationships and understand what the wants, needs, and desired outcomes of say like a local authority are. That's really, really good. But this is not a boys or girls club or any other kind of club. Now, I would completely disagree with that. It's a really important thing to get through to understand that this isn't based upon who you know. I'm not saying it's a perfect market, but it is transparent. And if your response is good enough, then it will win. If it pits all about, or it will certainly go to the head to head with another company. It does not mean just because you know somebody. I would completely critically disagree with that. Okay, so process. Again, we're going to whiz through this because we've got a lot to get through. So process, specify processes within say, we're going to use local authority. And when I use that phrase, we're just going to use that as a blanket term for all government departments, from small to large national government departments. So very specified processes, repeatable, predictable processes, whereas businesses tend to put a proposal in, sometimes a quote, a lot less restrictive, and every company works differently. Time, very set time periods. We'll talk about timelines on quotes, on tenders as we go along. Whereas in a normal commercial business, be more flexible. So, transparency, the freedom of information. Yes, the local authorities, etc., need to supply information freely. Almost everything you need to know is on their website, or you can ask a question and get it for you. Whereas in a commercial company, competitive pressures means that they will only supply the information they absolutely have to. That's a big difference on the way that you can research. And we talked about research in the last 2 webinars. Prime motivation, return on investment for a commercial business, whereas a local authority is about spending money wisely. They're not there to make a profit. They're there to receive value on what they spend. Stakeholders, generally in a business, fewer and identifiable. In the government, many and wide, and can be quite complex. So, and then the last thing, the focus, increasing profit margins, obviously for a business, whereas going with primary motivation, reducing spend and saving on the behalf of all of us as taxpayers. So we've talked about some of these things before. I'm not going to go through every single one, but the key issues facing a small company, small and medium enterprise that's going into this market. So inefficient experience in the public sector, that's you're involved in the fit to bid program, so therefore you're now learning more about it, so you'll have more experience. The industry is dominated by big companies that lock you out. Not true. It's these here, when we say these are not actual, some of these are perceived. So that's it references the question we talked about before. It's a perceived issue. It's not true. Your business is largely unknown to public sector buyers. Yes, it's important that you understand how to contact the procurement department and how you are informed of information, along with you can't reach the right people. This fit to bid program in the later will help you, guide you through how that all works. There are some practical criteria in a tender that stop you being considered. Yes, there may well be some things in there that you don't have. There may well be requirements for certifications, or there may be financial constraints. Again, that depends upon the tender. Lack of a proactive marketing strategy. In other words, you're not going out and attending something like Meet the Buyer events, which you're entitled to through this Fit to Bid program, to make sure you're in the right place with the right buyers. You have dated or no client reviews or testimonials. That's a big red flag. For one of the things you really must look at doing for your business is get testimonials, client reviews, put together case studies that are hopefully 12 months or a maximum 12 months old. They are so strong. They're needed for every tender response. Time constraints. Yes, you're running your business. And if you don't plan properly, then this can take a lot of time and it would appear taken away from your day-to-day business. Limited knowledge about the tendering process. That's why you're here, everyone, is to improve your amount of knowledge and understand how to write strong bids. And I'd like to no idea to put what into a response to make it a winning one. So we're going to talk through some of these. It's not really secrets. It's just elements that help your understanding and make you realize that this is possible. It can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. But if you put the work in, it is worthwhile. So some tender terminology. You're going to see this all the time. So to talk about this, so a pre-qualification questionnaire is a document you normally have to fill this in once. It's quite detailed. It's about the makeup and management and ownership of your company. It talks about insurance. It talks about your supply chain. It also is attached to things like your policies on modern slavery, et cetera, et cetera. It is detailed. You only need to do it once. You'll have to give those answers on every single tender response you ever supply. You'll give that information. Invitation to tender. which is a core document. That is the tender document. It explains what the requirements are, what the needs are, sometimes what the budget is, etc. Makes it really clear who they're looking to work for and what their outcome is. A request for a proposal is a kind of lightweight before they go to tender. Request for quotation, again, is before a full tender, but it will actually involve financials. And then you've got two similar things here, framework agreement and dynamic purchasing system. They're two sides of the same coin. Essentially, these are grouped suppliers to deliver one thing. So a simple example would be if a local authority was, say, was having a new hospital built, they would put a framework agreement together that would cover all the trades, all the services that were required, technical, service, building, etc. And they would look to bring all those companies together to pre-qualify them, etc. effectively, and then be able to draw down. So framework agreements and dynamic purchase system, which is a digital version of the same thing. These are really valuable things to get on. So you go on them, you apply as if it's a tender, but it's not. Once you're on it, you're on the list, and then you're in with a good chance of being offered work as that framework agreement carries on. It may well, like some of these last 5 and 10 years. It means then if there is work for you, they can ask for you to quote on something, but you don't actually have to go through the qualification process. You don't have to do a full tender response because they've already qualified you as being a fit and proper company to work with. So invitation to tender will contain all these sections. They'll have an introduction about the tender. They'll talk about the local authority or the organization and what it is that they do and what they're trying to achieve. It will talk about the conditions, if there are any legal parameters. It will talk about the really clear specification of what they want and the works to be provided. They'll talk about how to submit. They'll talk about what the questions are for qualitative. So from a quality point of view, they'll also ask from a pricing point of view. They'll ask you to sign a form of tender, which is a declaration by the bidder, along with the non-collusion, which means that everything is above board. And they'll give you, I mean, right at the end, the most successful point is if you're successful, then you will get a draft of proposed contract. But the fact is, this is your core document. This tells you everything you need to know about what's expected, why, how, when, etc. So you can make a decision as to whether you want to progress with this tender if it's right for you. So we're going to talk through some, might seem like apparent negatives, but it's important that you understand how this process works. So in the questions, they will ask you about the business. They'll ask quite detailed questions about the business, and they will detail grounds for exclusion, both mandatory and discretionary. So this is to make it really clear about the companies that they need to work with and the people that work or run that business. So in this particular one, under public relations, public contract regulations 2015, we must exclude any organizations guilty of any of the offences in regulations, etc., and they will detail what they are. So if you answer yes to any of those questions, it's required by law to exclude you from participating. So that's basically telling you that if anybody in your organization that runs the organization or the company itself has, for example, any, this is serious stuff. There's any sanctions where you've operated in a region or a country that there are sanctions and you're not allowed to operate in. There's an example. It's a real serious one. There are other ones. They will be detailed. You would be excluded. So generally, there is no point in applying for that. Discretionary exclusion means that you will ask you to declare, and then they will decide whether that declaration has an effect. So an example would be if one of the directors that runs the company has a CCJ, which has been settled, but is still on your record, then it is best to declare that. And the likelihood is they would actually say that's absolutely fine. The reason for declaring it is this. If you don't declare and they find something, they may just see that as reasons to exclude, even though if you declared it, they might not have done. Because what they don't want to, they want you to be transparent. It's, as we used that phrase before about being a fit and proper company to work with. They want to be very clear about that you are very, very upfront, which I suppose makes obvious sense. They're going to ask you about financial information. These questions might be quite searching. And in some cases, it might be worth talking to your accountant or your bookkeeper about how to supply this information. Again, it is about making sure that you're a fit and proper company, that you're run well, that you're financially stable. And there are certain situations where they would expect a certain level of sometimes indemnity, or that a certain level of money on your balance sheet. Depends upon the tender. It will be made very, very clear. But essentially, I've said this phrase before about wearing two hats. If you think as your business and you have a hat where you run the business, that's one thing. Your other hat is as a taxpayer and a council taxpayer, and you want to make sure that your money is going to companies that are going to deliver something properly and are still going to be around in 3 years. So as an example, if there's a 3-year contract, the local authority needs to be sure that according to your financial records, you're still going to be here in 3 years' time. Now, this might seem like a problem for new and young companies, but we will get to how you can get around some of this a bit later on in the webinar. So essentially, this is aimed at companies who've been around for 2, 3, 4 years plus, and they want to see records of your financials. And these are the reasons why, to understand your financial standing. But we'll get to how you can. There are ways to still, as a new young company, to still actually be involved in this tender process. They will also ask about insurance. Generally speaking, they'll tell you exactly what insurance that they need you to have, and they will ask you if you already hold it. If you don't, that isn't an issue, as long as you declare that should you be successful, that you will meet those minimum insurance requirements. So that's a straightforward one. But if you say you will, you have to. So you're in the invitation to tender. They will give details about the questions that they need answering, and they will give a weighting, a percentage normally, of how that should be answered and how the answer of that is going to be weighted in the rest of the document. So it gives an idea of importance. So service delivery, this is from a real one. Please provide a detailed method statement, how you propose to deliver. So this is your process. And the weighting of that is 25%. So it's important. Your mobilization plan, which is how to get going, get the tasks undertaken, is 10%. So it doesn't have no importance, but it's not as heavy as the service delivery. And talking about your management structure and information, your qualifications, competence, etc., has a 15% weighting. So it's just to give you a guidance. Now, often these weightings will be aligned with the number of words that you can use to answer the question. So as an example, service delivery might give you 750 words. Mobilization plan might give you 350 words. I'm just pulling these figures out just as an example. So they often are related. Not always, but sometimes they are related. The number of words, which is an absolute, it's not a target if you can do it in less, as we've said before, clarity of language. But the fact is, often they will ask for a less detailed answer on, or a less lengthy answer rather, when the weighting is less. Again, another example, experience. So that's the experience of the company and the team, 20%. Your business engagement, descriptive experience engaged in working with a wide range of SMEs to encourage. So these here, the wording here was actually for an invitation to tender that Branduin actually applied for. A situation very similar to this, or working with Brent. And so they wanted to know what we'd done previously, and the weighting that was 10%, and talked about our process, to give examples of how we have worked with companies to make sure that we're engaged and we are being inclusive in all ways. So there was 10% for that. And then you'll have other ones. I mean, I'm not in London, so I don't give a ton of the London living wage. However, this is an interesting one. And there's sometimes ones like this. London weighting is a good example, where they'll ask you for information, but there's no weighting to it. So it's just for information only, about indicate your organization pays its staff living wage at that rate. If you do not, do you propose to? And then if you do presently pay it, propose this for a contract, please set out this bring added value to the service. So why do you do it? That's 10% on that if you do it. Okay. So there may be other questions like they'll ask you a question. There's no weighting. However, if they ask a question, even if there's no weighting, endeavor to answer it fully. So, meet most economically advantageous tender. And I can say, because there is something called the Procurement Act that's come in, and this is changing slowly to something most advantageous tender, and they're taking the E out, they're taking the economic side. It doesn't, the price is important, they're just taking that out. However, for now, it does still exist. So in that invitation to tender, there will be a ratio of how they're going to score this. And so on there is 75, 25, 75% on price, 25% on quality. The focus is on low price. So you understand. Sometimes it can be higher than that, depending on the industry. For example, I've worked with a couple of clients that are in facilities management, essentially cleaning companies, and they tend to be more on price than quality. Not they don't want quality, but because of the high turnover, it's generally on price. The exact opposite is also quite common. So 25% on price, 75% on quality. It does not mean price doesn't matter, but it means the quality is the really clear thing on it. The point about this is, even when the ratio for price is high, it does mean that the quality still matters. It is not simply a race to the bottom that the price is king. The quality still has to reach all the marks and be scored appropriately. Again, to meet one of the beliefs that it's just down to price. No, it is not just down to price. Price is obviously important for the reasons that we discussed before, because it's our money. But that to believe it's just down to price is not correct. Okay. So they will evaluate your response using the weighted criteria. They'll use your financial evaluation to calculate the cost of each tender compared to the lowest price, and then tenders are ranked based upon an aggregate or an average. They will often share the formula of how this works. When you read the formula, it might not be really clear, but what they're trying to say is the reason why they publish a formula is because to show that the way they're going to review this is consistent and clear. And again, goes back to it's just large companies. No, the size of the company is not part of the formula. So your tenders are scored, and we mentioned this before, and where you're aiming for, obviously everybody's aiming for a 5, but you're aiming for a 4 or 5. We're not even going to talk about a 0. A 0 means you're just not even trying. In your evaluation, they will look at ensuring first you've answered every question. And we discussed this in detail last week for those that made it. And I'm just going to say, for those that didn't, all these webinars are on the Brand Doing website. So if you want to go back and review something you've seen before, or you weren't able to make the others, go to the YouTube channel and you'll be able to find the previous webinars. And this one that we're on now will go on sometime in the next week. So what you're looking for is to answer the question fully. But then, of course, make sure the information that you supply is not just accurate, but it's relevant, that it shows that you're the right kind of company, that you understand what they're after, you understand what their goals are, and you can repeat some of their goals and the outcomes they're after and the bigger picture in your response. It's really important that the enthusiasm and the understanding and as well as the technical ability to deliver something at the right price comes across. So for those to score 5, it hits everything. It hits the outcomes that the local authority are after. It answers your questions fully and transparently, and it shows that you want to work with them through the contract and you want to improve things. If you can get all these things across, then you will score a 5. And that is what you're aiming for. You're aiming for a gold standard. The thing about this is it takes time. It takes time. And you must set yourself enough time in order to be able to do this. So, which takes us onto the tender timetable. Probably the most important thing on the invitation to tender will be the timeline. It'll be detailed something like this. There's some, So I don't know what 15th of July 22022. That's obviously a typo. My apologies of everyone. But if we can ignore the typo, this is how this works. The tender is published on one date, depending upon the kind of thing that it is. There may well be the opportunity to do a site visit. Clarification deadline will mean there is a period where you can ask questions, And those questions are through the submission portal, and your questions are answered anonymously. You can also see the questions that other potential participants have asked and see their answers. Then there will be a submission deadline. This submission deadline is really strict. I currently am working with a client of ours, and the submission deadline is 12 noon on the 7th of January. And that has to be in by 12 noon. If it's 1 minute past, then it will be excluded. They will not extend. And there's no point saying, oh, sorry, I missed it, or there was a problem online, or I had a connection problem. So we always tell people to take that day and take a day off it. We always aim for a day before. And these dates here, if you're going to seriously apply for something, they need to be in your calendar, in everyone's calendar, on a plan, so everybody is clear, because time just runs away. And you can see there, this is just an example of one. Time is quite tight between the tenders published on the 4th of July. The submission deadline is the 22nd of July. Sometimes they really are that tight. Sometimes they're longer, but often they're really quite tight. So you really need to be ready for this. And like I said, there's no point saying, oh, can we give it in tomorrow? No. Once the deadline is gone, the deadline is gone. Sorry, that's me not understanding Zoom. Sorry. So there's in order to submit a winning bid, there are jobs to be done. And a lot of this will be covered in the later parts of the Fit to Bid program, where you actually start getting into the nitty gritty of your business and the kind of tenders that you're going to go for. But the things that I'd want to really look at here is to uncover desired outcomes. So really understanding in that invitation to tender what it is that's the big outcome. What are they really looking for? And if that's not really clear, then you can go onto their website and see whether it's part of a bigger program. So where I am in Lancashire, in Preston, there's a big amount of work being done to develop and redevelop areas of Preston. And this has become called the Preston model. And almost everything is going under this big outcome for Preston model, which is to rejuvenate areas which have fallen into disrepair, etc. And so that's their big desire, broken down into lots of smaller outcomes, financial, social, etc. And there's so much information available that this is the reason why it's worth being in contact with the local authority. It's not about somehow getting a jump ahead, you'll be more likely to be considered. It's about understanding what it is they're after. And so when you respond, you understand them better. What is your customer trying to get done that will lead to the outcomes they seek? So what are they trying to achieve? What problems are they trying to solve? What needs are they trying to satisfy? And what are the big outcomes? These are the things, if you can, from that invitation to tender, you should, excuse me, just get a quick drink. You should be able to glean that information. It might not jump out, but the fact is it will be in there. It will explain why they're doing this. It will often mention if it's part of a bigger program. But what should be really clear is those big outcomes. Because when you respond, and we've mentioned this before, what's really, really key is that you get across what value you offer. So it's all about them. So when you respond, it has to be really, really clear that you are there to solve a problem for them. So their problem, if you said their problem statement is the invitation to tender, we have an issue, we need somebody to deliver this in order to provide this service, because they have to provide it as a local authority. So therefore, what can you do to solve that problem for them and help them? And if you have that in your mind, it will, as well as all the detail and the financials, etc. If that comes off in your response, and the way you'll do this is by asking these questions: what are they trying to achieve? What's the problem? What needs are trying to satisfy? And what are the big outcomes? If you have that and you mold it into your response, this is why bid responding is a learned skill. It is about answering the questions, but it's also about the language that's used. And as the Fit to Bid program progresses, as you take part in it, you'll understand more and more of this, because you'll do some more practical work with your one-to-ones with the brand advisors. ESG, environmental and social governance. This is a international understanding of this. Is something that affects commercial companies and governments all over the world. So we can look here what it actually says. ESG is a collective term for businesses' impact on the environment and society, as well as how robust and transparent its governance is. So my way of looking at ESG is do no harm. What is it that you do as a business that reduces your harm, both environmental and social, and what are your governance practices around that? Now, this might sound really complex and like a lot of red tape. To be honest with you, for most small businesses, these are things you're already doing. And if there are ESG requirements, they'll be really, really clear in the invitation to tender. It'll be so what they'll be doing is they'll be sharing their requirements and expecting you, when you deliver, to do everything you can to meet their requirements. So effectively, so you're helping them. What do you do that meets these needs? So they're transferring their ESG needs onto you for this particular tender. And because it's made really, really clear, and like I said, most of the time, it's things you're already doing. The governance part is often about how you record, what metrics, and what targets you might have. So looking at this, environmental, energy usage, climate change strategy, waste reduction, biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon footprint, all things that most of us are trying to do something about. Social, fair paid living wages, equal opportunities, employee benefits, because actually people don't realize employee welfare can be part of this as part of ESG, workplace health and safety, community engagement. Do you engage with local community and in what ways? Responsible supply chain. So you understand your supply chain is strong and ethical, adhering to what's called labor laws, and there's an American spelling there, but so we would say adhering to employment laws here. And then the governance really is about the regulation and your recording. So your own corporate governance or whatever level. I know if you're a small one-man band, that might sound odd. Corporate governance basically is how you operate, your own risk management, your compliance, if you have to comply with certain regulations, the ethical business practices, how you operate, avoiding conflicts of interest in all levels, and making sure your accountancy is transparency, which keeps your integrity. So that's obviously that's the admin side. That's things a lot of this, if you think about it, you're going to be doing it anyway. But it isn't something to scare you off. It's something that you just need to understand that's part of this. You just answer the questions. And as there is a need that you make sure that you can understand that you can meet it, and this is how you're going to meet it. Now, there is actually there's some information here, and I'm not going to go through the time that well, because I want to make sure we've got time for questions. But because the ESG requirements are really, really clear in the invitation to tender, the one thing we would say is the last action here. Make it a person or a team's responsibility. Whatever you agree to, whatever the tender actually responds, make sure it is somebody's responsibility, either a person or a team of people's responsibility, because this one, define what ESG material you should be collecting, what data you're able to collect, track, monitor, and report. Local authorities love data. And if there is a need to report on, for example, let's say, for example, I'm going to do something simple. You're going to look to reduce your company's, over the length of the 3-year contract, you're going to reduce your company's carbon footprint by 30%. And I'm just making this up. But if you are going to do that, then you have to have a plan for doing it. And then you will track your success against that. So what metrics are you going to, and how you do measure that, and how you're reporting it, because they will expect it to be done. So somebody has to have responsibility to do that, because if you promise the local authority in writing you're going to do something, they will expect you to do it. And if you set yourself a target that they agree with, or possibly they might set you a target, they expect you to endeavor to meet that target and correct data. And if you're struggling in some way, for example, then you report that and say, what are you going to do to get back on track? So it's really, really important that you don't just think this is a box ticking exercise. It isn't. It's about making sure that you stick to what you say you're going to do, that you say you're going to do it, and that you can actually record it and share the information, the reporting, to show that you have, if that makes sense. So what I would say is there is actually a guide. How do you get the funders aware of delivery of their ESG KPIs? Well, That's a good question. So the question is, how do you keep the funders aware of delivery of their ESG KPIs? So by the funders, we're going to say that, say a local authority, they will more than likely have a plan of reporting expected for you. They will say they'll want an annual or a 6-month report. The one thing that to bear in mind, not just on ESG, but in anything else, the one thing that won't happen, I guarantee it, is that if you win a contract with, and let's be more positive, when you win a contract with a local authority, say for 3 years, they're not going to just escape. There you go. There's your payment plan. Get on with it. During those 3 years, they are going to expect to talk to you constantly. They will set up regular meetings. They'll expect regular reporting. So a schedule for that would be really, really clear. So if there are KPIs along that, then it'll be shown really clearly about how that is to be shared and when. So you would have a schedule in actual fact. They wouldn't expect just to leave it and well, how do we supply the information? No, they'll be all over that, I promise you. So if ESG can be described as do no harm, social value is, if you like, more positive in us, about what you can do, what the positives you can do. Social value covers a whole load of areas. It is increasingly important. On tenders, now the figures might have changed, but the last time I checked, any tender that has a value over circa 130 grand will have at least 10% of the scoring will be based upon social value. So it becomes a really big deal. And that 10% might be the differentiator. Your response, your really, really good response on social value could be the difference between you winning a contract and not, especially in a market that's crowded. So you need to take this seriously. So examples of social value: promoting local skills and employment. So you're employing within your local area. You can spread that out to employ within a particular demographic, bringing people back into work, etc. Supporting the growth of responsible local business. Yeah, what's your supply chain? Do you only work with small businesses as much as possible, local businesses? Fostering healthier, safer, more resilient communities. What do you do in the community if you can? Obviously, environment, kind of obvious. And like I said, most businesses, these are things we're doing already, but how do you record that, and what plans do you have? Are you involved in innovation? In what way, especially if it has a social impact or a local impact? Do you work for economic inequality, so increasing supply chain resilience and capacity, so working hard with your supply chain on pricing, but also sustainability? Climate change, which works with environment, and then equal opportunity, which also works with the jobs, inclusivity, diversity, working with disadvantaged or disabled people when possible. Do you make sure you don't exclude certain communities or work with communities that are viewed as being excluded? All these things are part of social value, and this isn't exhaustive. There's more than this. However, on a particular tender, there might be social value requirements. So they might say, right, so for social value for this tender, then we're looking at environmental, or we're looking at social, or we're looking at innovation. As I think innovation is unlikely, but it is possible. So Dennis, a question: are there accreditations that enhance your social values, such as B Corp accredited? Yes, so long as you can explain why that makes a difference. So if we've referenced before, if you heard before, then there's a kind of a so what. If that being B Corp accredited has a definite positive social value, and you can demonstrate that, and it meets what's on that tender document, and said that where this year we're well, not this year, for this tender we're going to concentrate on these areas for social value. This is how we're measuring it, and that then can be built. And then the answer is yes. On its own, no. So it's all about relevance, Dennis, if that makes sense. It depends upon the tender, depends upon the details. What I would say, you use everything that you can to demonstrate your social value as per the requirements of that tender. It isn't a one size fits all. This is our social value policy, and we drop it in for everything. You might have to look at something and go, right, in order to win this tender, we might need to look at how we record this, and we might want to get involved in our local community more. We might need to look at our supply chain, etc. Okay, you're welcome, Dennis, no problem. So there are documents available to you. as you go into the program, which will explain in detail what you can do to deliver social value, about ethical working, how it says on there on the right hand side, number 3, hire local apprenticeships. So looking for apprenticeships, working, tracking your carbon footprint, paying a living wage. So this documentation is so you understand it, but it's not rocket science. Like I said, a lot of this you will already do. It's about making it clear and how you are going to record it. And if you're setting yourself targets or a target set for you, then how you're going to record that, how you're going to prove and evidence that you're doing it. So it is really important. It is all the things, if you're not doing it, then we should already be doing. So again, I think this is an opportunity. See, I've always described social value as a small business's superpower. And I'll give you a simple example of why. It is much easier for a small company, a small local company, to demonstrate social value, certainly at local level, where you can make a difference in your local area. It is a lot harder from experience for a large company to do it. So my background working with Capita, social value, they like to make, big companies like to make grand gestures. And one of the things I like to do from an environmental point of view was plant trees, which sounds fine, but actually planting trees, as they discovered, or actually we discovered, is quite complex and expensive and doesn't always work. So an example, we had a load of trees planted, we bought some land, planted some trees, and the trees weren't planted in the right way. And I'm not an expert on tree husbandry, but it affected the drainage in this particular area, and some of the trees had to be moved. So actually, that wasn't a big hit. And I'm just giving you that as an example. So it's kind of a simple example. But a small company can really demonstrate, especially in local area, the difference they can make. Whereas for a large company, it can be quite difficult. Also, your competitor, which might be in the same business as you, if you put the extra work in making sure that your social value and your ESG work is really, really top notch, that might just be the difference. That 10% might just make a difference on how you're scored. Remember that. So it's an opportunity. So we're not going to do this as an exercise now, but this is something you might want to discuss in your one-to-ones. Many of you might have done a SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. It is a very simple and very useful way to look at your business. But if you look at a tender and then do a SWOT analysis, you really look at this hard and go, right, so do we meet the requirements and can we add value to score highly? Where do we not fully satisfy certain high score requirements? Opportunities, it's high valued, say it's prestigious, it might be good for you. What threats? Major competitor will gain advantage if we don't win. Potentially, that's maybe a bit dramatic. Regulations are changing fast. That might be an issue. Your costs might go up if you look at it. It's possible in some that the profit margin might be maybe difficult for you to handle. You might not have enough resource. The idea is to look at this, that no one particular thing becomes the focus. That if you have weaknesses, what can you do about those weaknesses? And what those threats, are they acceptable? Can you mitigate them? So it's to balance the strengths and the opportunities by understanding the full picture. This is what in my line of work we call a go, no go. You go through this process, look at everything, and then you have a go, no go conversation, meaning do we go ahead and we bid on this tender based on the fact that if we win, we'll have to deliver it. Or looking at this SWOT analysis, we think, do you know what? All things being considered, this might not be the right ones because the weakness and threats outweigh the opportunities and strengths. It's a really simple process, really, really good. When you have your one-to-ones, have a talk with your advisor. If you haven't done this before, they'll be happy to take you through the best way to do a SWOT analysis. It's a really, really good skill to gain if you've not already done it. But certainly it's a great way to look at a tender. So I did mention earlier that for smaller, younger companies, it can be difficult to get, generally can be perceived to be difficult to get into the tender process because you haven't been around long enough. You maybe can't meet all the requirements of a particular tender. So the way to handle that, so this proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, is to look at developing partnerships with a larger or actually more importantly, a more established company. So A local authority will only deal with one legal entity, so what they might call a lead bidder. But that lead bidder can have a consortium of multiple companies to actually deliver. So, I mean, you think about the building trade, this is how this works. You'll have a large building contractor who will then actually subcontract to lots and lots and lots of other businesses, but the main contractor is actually responsible. This is how this works. So the legal entity, and let's say that's your company, you're doing the response. So it is on your company to deliver this. But in order to deliver it, you have a whole host of other companies that in order to deliver different parts of that. That is perfectly fine. There is no limit to how many subcontractors or other parties you can work with, so long as it's understood that you are responsible for them and they are fit and proper companies. The other way around, if you were to work with a larger company who's they're responding, they're the legal entity, and you are partnering with them as a subcontractor, so you will get the work, but you're not responsible to run the tender. They're responsible. You are there to just be paid to do some work. That can be a very, very valuable way to work. There are lots of ways this can operate. I think the most important thing to understand, though, is that the local authorities do not see this negatively. This is a real positive for them as long as the service or the product or whatever is delivered. There are lots of different legal arrangements, financial governance, and lots of decisions made about how this works. But from a bid writing point of view, however complex the subcontractor and partnership is, the response must read as one document. So it can't be, it's been written by one company halfway through and then the other company takes over, because you will be able to tell. It needs to be written by a single author, approved by everybody, but by a single author. That's really important, because if it's written by 2, 3, 4 different people, you can just tell. And when it gets this complicated, it often is better to bring in a specialist to help you pull that bid together. You can do it yourself, but it can get really complicated because of the different companies involved. But the point here is that a small company, a new company, can look at being part of delivering a contract as long as they look to partner with another organization. The other thing you can do as a company is you can look to displace incumbent suppliers, or those that are actually delivering currently, and you'll often see on websites when they're looking to re-tender on something that's going to run out. So you can look at how successful that's been. A lot of that information is available often on websites, on the local authorities' websites. You can start building relationships, so you can understand so relationships do matter as much as it's not a way of circumnavigating the process. You can start talking about contract end dates well in advance, because if you say there's a contract, you ask them a question, when is this contract ending? They will tell you. Also, if you don't know, you ask which company are delivering that contract for, currently, they will also tell you that, because this is all publicly available information. You tailor USPs. So USPs. So the first part of USPs is that it's unique. There's very little that's unique, really. So USPs really, what's your differentiator rather than being unique? And it's quite right there. Suppliers that offer a one-size-fits-all approach usually fail. So if you can't do everything, then bring somebody in, bring a partner in to deliver it, and see that as a positive. You price your bids competitively. It's not about being the cheapest. It's about making sure that what you're charging is the right value, because they understand cheapest is not necessarily the way, they have learned over the years. So it is really important that your price is competitive, but it's backed up by your quality. Like I said, you don't necessarily need to be the one that's displacing. That's true. It could be another company. You could companies you already work with now. So that's maybe they've been around longer than you have. Could we partner to deliver this? And it's worth the conversation. And it can be more effective to partner with a larger previous supplier to challenge the incumbent. Absolutely, purely because of the fact that you've been around and you understand more. This is very high level. There is so much detail about how a partnership and subcontracting work. I think basically what we're trying to tell you, though, is just because you're a smaller and maybe a newer company, it does not mean you can't get involved in this. What you need to do is look at your network, look at the companies maybe you already work with, and see whether you can talk to them and say, look, there's a tender here we'd like to be involved in. However, if we would be stronger together in order to deliver this. It's something that you want to bear. And bear in mind that from a local authority point of view, they see that as a positive, not a negative. So your tender journey. So you're in a specific sector or subsector. You need to define your value proposition and refine it. That'll be part of that you'll go through in later processes in this bid fit to bid process. You'll understand your value proposition if you don't now. You focus your efforts where it matters to maximize your return on investment, kind of obvious. Subcontract for essential experience, that as we've just talked about, that helps. That also helps you deliver, get your case studies and references, because if you subcontract but you've been subcontracting to deliver part of a local authority program, then that's a case study and you can get a reference against that you delivered well, and that will stand you in good stead when you go out to bid on a tender in your own right. You look for niche opportunities. There are tender alerts on Find a Tender Contract Finder. You can look on LinkedIn networking, which is what part of what FitBid's about, and exhibitions, and obviously Meet the Buyer events. I went on about this. I think I mentioned it every time. You will be invited to a Meet the Buyer event. I think it's in March. The value of that Meet the Buyer event is huge. To be in that company of local authority procurement team, and also what's known as tier one companies. Tier one companies are people like Heathrow. So to be in the same room with people like that, because you got to understand that while we're talking about local authorities, large organizations like Heathrow, they also put out tenders following quite a strict regime, very similar to how the government works. And so you'll be expected to work with them in the same way. So to be in the same room with these kind of people is hugely advantageous. Major differentiators: be agile and adaptive. We said social value, community, wealth building. So how can you demonstrate that working with you doesn't just deliver what they want, but actually helps the local area? Because there's a lot of pressure on local authorities and councils to keep wealth in the community for good reason. So how do you add to that? Does your supply chain involve smaller companies? Do you work with local communities in various ways, et cetera, et cetera? Anything you can show that can add social value locally will always have a strong value to it. And then 2 questions: can we do it? And if the answer is yes, can we win it? Based upon all the information, your SWOT analysis, can you win it? And if you get to that point, then you should put your tender together and go further. There is a lot to think about. And as you can see there, there's I think we've used it. We had this slide last week. So you make sure that you're compliant. You answer the why you, so why your company rather than somebody else. Showing that you're customer focused to every single response, every answer that you've given, where possible, demonstrates how you can add value and how you understand them, that you're trying to deliver what they need, not what you need. Your solution is compelling, shows the value. It's very, very well written, clear, and really easy to understand, with no assumptions and no areas of go, I don't understand that. That it's been checked and it's been reviewed before you send it. It's really easy to evaluate because you're answering every question really clearly and accurately, and every claim you make, you show evidence. So your claims of uniqueness, capability, any differentiated value, etc., that you can evidence it by review, by case study, by testimonial. If you cover all of those, you're in an excellent position to win not just one tender, but several tenders. But it is a process. It can be daunting. And my view is this: do it because there may well be somebody else in your industry who looks at this and goes, do you know what? This is just too much like hard work. Yeah, it is work. And the fact is that if you do it and they don't, then you're in with a better chance. You've got to be in it to win it. And the other thing is, you put together all this work It's hard at the beginning, but then you build up a bid library, is what we call it, where you can, a lot of this work you've actually already done. Every tender is different, but if you're in one particular industry, some of this you can reuse and rework. So you don't actually have as much work to do on your later responses. When you have your one-to-one following your bid questionnaire you'll receive next week, book your 2 private one-to-ones. And the outcome from that will be an action plan. Who's doing what? So what needs to be done, by who, and by when. This is a kind of self-contract. This is a commitment for you to deliver based upon that to take you into the next stage of it. And it's a kind of contract with yourself rather than with us. But it's amazing what difference it makes by writing these things down and saying, look, these are the actions we need to take. This is who's going to take them. And this is when they're going to be done by. Right. That's a lot of the core things done. I'm watching the clock. So this is the last of the webinars that I'm delivering on behalf of Brent. So hopefully, I know there's a lot of information and your head might be spinning a little, but what I will guarantee is when you go through the following stages and you go into you're actually seeing a tender document, at least some of what I've said will resonate and you go, right, okay, that's not a complete shock because I've listened to this before. And I know what an invitation to tender is. You might not have read one, but you know basically what it is. Now, the later elements of here are where more detail, evaluate your tender business model, talk about your value proposition, 13th February, develop your product services procurement trends. So this is all about getting you ready, how to develop key partnerships, pitching for success ahead of the Meet the Buyer event. And then on the 20th of March, the Community Wealth Building Summit and the Meet the Buyer event at Brent Civic Centre. I implore you, get it in your calendar, mark the time out. Don't miss that opportunity because it's really fantastic. But also make sure you attend the Prepare to Meet the Buyer webinar prior to that to arm you with as much information as possible. We've been running these for quite a while, so we know what we're doing, and to absolutely get the most out of that event. So, so obviously this is part of this program. And like I said again about the wanting to make sure you get through that. All the previous webinars are on the Brandon YouTube channel. Just type in Brandon into YouTube and they're all there. These and others. I'm sorry. I know it's always the same. We've made the time. If you have to zoom off, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you've learned as much as possible. Make the most of the rest of the program, and including your one-to-one session where you'll have a tender advice session. Go through so you fill your action card, and make sure use of all the resources that will be made available to you for the rest of the program. Use everything. Talk to everybody. Use as much. That's what we're here for. That's what the program is all about. So, thank you very much. Register for the skills program. Wait for your link next week, complete your questionnaire, book your one-to-one sessions, get in, make the most of this wonderful Fit to Bid program. And with that, I will stick around if anybody's got any questions. Other than that, have a really good day. I hope you've enjoyed these sessions. I have, and you take care, and I wish you all the best.